It's a quiet evening in Rome, 1963. Inside a quiet room hidden behind the walls of the Vatican, an aging Jesuit priest stares down at a letter trembling in his hands. But what he's holding isn't just a letter. It's a warning, a thread, unraveling a secret that stretches far beyond these walls. A Soviet plot, cold, calculated, and designed to destroy not just a man, but the very soul of the church. And the worst part, the Pope they're targeting is already dead. Moscow, February 1960. Behind thick velvet curtains in the Kremlin, Nikita Khrushchev slams his fist against the table. The decision has been made, a secret operation without precedent. The target, the Vatican, the weapon, memory, the victim, a dead pope. They call it Operation Seat 12. Seat 12 for Pius the 12th. The logic is cold, brutal. The dead can't defend themselves. In the shadows of the room, General Ivan Agiyants, head of the KGB's Disinformation Directorate, spreads a folder across the table. His voice cuts through the smoke. We'll destroy the Vatican's moral authority. We'll plant doubt. We'll make Pope Pacelli look like Hitler's partner in crime. And we'll strike them where they're weakest, at the truth. Skepticism, deceit. These were the weapons they chose. The plan was simple, brutal, effective, discredit the dead. In 1960, deep inside the Kremlin, the KGB began crafting a lie. Not just any lie, but a masterstroke of disinformation designed to bury the legacy of Pope Pius the 12th. To the Soviets, he was a threat, a staunch anti-communist, a man whose words still echoed across the Iron Curtain. But he was also gone, dead, and the dead can't defend themselves. That's what made him the perfect target. They knew his history. Before he was Pope, Eugenio Pacelli had lived in Germany, served as papal nuncio in Berlin. For Soviet operatives, that was enough. Enough to twist the story, enough to turn a diplomat into a collaborator, a man of peace into a man of silence. We'll make him a Nazi sympathizer, they said. We'll turn him into the Pope who let the Holocaust happen. But to make the world believe such a massive lie, they needed more than accusations. They needed evidence, or something that looked like it. Real Vatican documents, taken, altered, rewritten. A lie wrapped in a shred of truth, the most dangerous kind. And for that, they turned to someone who could get the job done. Romania's secret police, the Securitate, one of the most ruthless intelligence agencies in the Eastern Bloc. Their mission, infiltrate the Vatican and steal the past. A young general receives a mission. His name is Ion Mihai Pacepa, a rising star in Romania's Securitate. Brilliant, loyal, dangerous, and now the point man for one of the most audacious deceptions of the Cold War. His assignment is clear: infiltrate the Vatican, gain their trust, and open the door to their most sacred secrets. Pacepa boards a plane to Rome under diplomatic cover, a soft-spoken envoy from a communist regime pretending to make peace. And when he steps through the ancient gates of the Vatican, he smiles. Romania wishes to restore relations with the Holy See, he says. A lie, but a tempting one. After years of persecution and silence, this sudden offer of reconciliation seems almost miraculous, and the bait, nearly impossible to refuse. $1 billion loan, 25 years, 0 interest. All the Vatican has to do is help. He says,
"Let us study your archives. We need to rediscover our shared history."
To some in the Curia, the offer sounds suspicious. To others, hopeful. Pope John the 23rd is calling for dialogue with the East. The Church is desperate to reach souls behind the Iron Curtain. Maybe, just maybe, this is a step toward peace, and so, under strict conditions, the gates open. Pachipa's smile hides something darker, because now, the Soviets have what they need. From 1960 to 1962, Romanian agents, disguised as priests, comb through the archives. Letter by letter, they are looking for anything at all, that could smear the memory of Pope Pius the Twelfth. His wartime correspondence, his speeches, his diplomatic cables. But they find nothing. No collaboration, no silence, no sympathy for the Nazis. Only evidence of a man who hated fascism and saved thousands of Jews. To the Soviets, this is a problem, and problems can be rewritten. So Pachipa ships hundreds of pages to Moscow, harmless documents, routine files, real Vatican material. And behind closed doors, the KGB gets to work. They take phrases out of context, twist the meaning, insert forged paragraphs, blend truth with fiction until the line disappears. It's not a dossier, it's a weapon. A new story begins to take shape, one where the Vatican turned its back on the Jews, one where Pius the 12th stood its silence. But the Soviets know documents alone won't move the world. They need something more, something emotional, something unforgettable. Not a newspaper headline, not a leaked memo. No, they need a stage. They need a play. A bitter wind curls through the streets of West Berlin. Guests in heavy coats step through the doors of the Freie Volksbühne Theater, shaking snow off their shoulders. Among them, journalists, artists, diplomats, all of them here for the same reason. A new play, The Deputy, written by a young, unknown German playwright named Rolf Hochhuth. According to the program, it's a moral drama, but behind the scenes, it's something else entirely. Backstage, in the shadows behind the curtain, stands the director, Erwin Piskater, a theatrical legend, communist sympathizer, founder of the Proletarian Theater in Berlin. During the war, he sought refuge in the Soviet Union. Some say he never truly left it behind. To those watching closely, it's clear this was no random choice. Piskater was the perfect man to bring Hochhuth's vision to life. And Hochhuth, he claims his inspiration came from the testimony of an SS officer, one who spoke of the Vatican's silence during the Holocaust. But some wonder, was it really testimony? Or was it a script? One that had quietly arrived, slipped under a door in the dead of night. The lights dim, the curtain rises. What unfolds on stage is not history, it's a shadow of it, a dark, distorted version of wartime Rome. In Hochhuth's version, Pope Pius the 12th is not a man of conscience, but a cold, calculating bureaucrat, detached, silent, more concerned with church property than human life. Beside him, a fictional young Jesuit desperately pleads for action. Why do you remain silent? Why don't you scream against the gas? The line echoes through the theater like a slap. The audience is silent, tense. Catholics look down. Others whisper furiously. When the curtain finally falls, it's not to applause. It's to shock, to outrage, and to something else the Soviets have been counting on. Momentum. That night, a myth is born. The myth of Hitler's Pope. Just one premiere, one spark, and the fire begins to spread, exactly as the KGB had planned. In the months that follow, the deputy moves beyond Berlin, Stockholm, Geneva, London, Paris. By the fall of 1963, thousands have seen it, and in 1964, it crosses the Atlantic to Broadway. The The play is translated into over 20 languages. It becomes a global sensation, not just a performance, but a weapon. A weapon aimed at the memory of Pius the XII. Audiences leave convinced that the Pope, the same Pope who sheltered Jews and resisted fascism, had stood idly by while the Holocaust raged, that he had chosen silence over salvation, that he had collaborated. The impact is devastating. Suddenly, people who had never even heard of Rolf Hochhuth now know that Pius the XII hated Jews. They've seen it. On stage, in full costume, the lie begins to settle. And somewhere in Moscow, Yuri Andropov, the KGB's master of disinformation, is reported to have said, "People are more willing to believe mud than sanctity." And the mud was sticking. Across Europe, newspaper headlines ask, did the Vatican turn a blind eye to genocide? Was the Pope a coward? Or worse, complicit? In cafes and college halls, the debate rages. For many, especially those already skeptical of the Church, Hochhuth's fiction becomes historical fact. Truth is drowned in the whisper of a lie, at least for a time. But as the lie spreads, so does something else. Anger, disgust, defiance, among survivors, among Catholics, among those who knew what Pius the XII truly did during the war. To them, the deputy is not art, it's blasphemy. It's not a stage play, it's a betrayal. It feels like someone is smearing the legacy of one of the last true moral lights in Europe's darkest hour. One of those voices rises from France, a man who had seen that darkness firsthand, a man who knew what betrayal really looked like. His name was Father Michel Riquet. But who was Michel Riquet? To understand the fire that burned in him, the anger, the sorrow, the moral urgency, we have to go back. France, 1940s. Nazi boots thunder through Europe, and in Paris, a young Jesuit priest refuses to stand still. His name is Michel Riquet, and he is about to become more than just a priest. He becomes part of the French resistance. While the Vichy regime collaborates, while others turn a blind eye, Riquet steps into the shadows, risking everything to help those hunted by the Reich. Allied pilots, political prisoners, Jews. His rectory becomes a safe house, his hands, instruments of escape. By the end of the war, he will have saved over 500 Allied airmen, smuggling them out of occupied France to freedom. But he doesn't stop there. He hides Jews, guides them, feeds them, shelters them. But the Gestapo is watching. In January 1944, they strike. Riquet is arrested. First, Mauthausen, then Dachau. He survives, but just barely. Cold, hunger, he sees death daily, and yet he never loses faith. Inside the barbed wire silence of Dachau, Riquet finds something remarkable: hope. In secret, prisoners smuggle news, and sometimes, when the static clears, they catch it. A crackling broadcast from Radio Vatican. The Pope's voice, distant, faint, defiant. Riquet would later say, "When we heard the Pope's words, we felt connected to something greater. We were not forgotten. We were still part of the world and part of the fight." That voice, the voice of Pius the XII, gave him strength. And when the war finally ends, Riquet returns to Paris, alive, but changed forever. His first public appearance isn't in vestments, it's in prison stripes. He steps into Notre Dame Cathedral in front of thousands of faithful, wearing the same tattered uniform he wore in Dachau. No robe, no collar, just a former number, a living testimony. He preaches forgiveness, he preaches truth, and the entire country listens. that image, a skeletal Jesuit standing where saints once stood, telling France to forgive, etched itself into the soul of a nation. Riquet becomes a moral icon, not just for Catholics, but for anyone who believes in courage, in mercy, in conscience. He continues preaching, teaching, reconciling. He saves lives long after the war ends. At least 6 Jews will later testify Michel Riquet saved them from certain death. One of them would say, if anyone embodied the conscience of those years, it was Father Riquet. And now, in 1963, that same conscience is burning. Because Riquet sees something happening that he cannot ignore. He sees a lie, a calculated smear campaign, one aimed at the very man whose voice gave him hope in Dachau. Pius the 12th, a man he believes with every fiber of his being, did not remain silent. Riquet knows what's at stake, and he won't stand by this time either. A rainy morning in Paris, inside the offices of Le Figaro, one of France's most respected newspapers, an editor reads a letter. Slowly, carefully, the headline stands out immediately. Bold, defiant, a direct challenge to the growing chorus condemning Pope Pius the Twelfth. Pius the Twelfth, the truth I am obliged to tell. The byline? Father Michel Riquet, S.J. The editor looks up. A war hero, a priest who survived Dachau, a man who saved lives and earned the moral trust of a nation. This is not a voice to be ignored. And so, without hesitation, he sends the article to print. The next day, January 4th, 1964, thousands of Parisians open their morning paper and read something they didn't expect. Testimony, not from a politician, not from a playwright, but from a man who had suffered, who had seen evil, and who had heard the Pope's voice when it mattered most. Pius the 12th spoke. Pius the 12th condemned. Pius the 12th acted. In those terrible years, when we listened to Radio Vatican behind barbed wire, we felt connected to him, helping persecuted Jews, resisting Nazi terror. Riquet writes, his words are not vague, they are personal, precise. He remembers the Pope's Christmas message of 1942, one of the earliest public denunciations of the Holocaust. He recalls the refugees, the secret shelters, the thousands saved under the Church's protection. And then he delivers the line that cuts through the noise. Anyone who says Pius the 12th was indifferent is not telling the truth. The article lands like a thunderclap. For many in France, it's the first real break in the narrative. Because if this man, a concentration camp survivor, defends the Pope, maybe Hochhuth's story isn't the whole truth. Riquet is not alone. Across the world, others begin to speak. Even some Jews, like Israel Zoli, the former chief rabbi of Rome, who converted to Catholicism after the war, inspired by the Pope's actions. Meanwhile, in Rome, the Vatican takes a breath and prepares to respond. On the chair of St. Peter now sits a new pope, Paul VI, a man who knew Pius the 12th personally, who had served him closely for years. And for him, this attack is not just slander, it's personal. Less than a month after the deputy premiered, Montini, still Archbishop of Milan, publicly protested the way Pius the 12th had been portrayed. And when he ascended to the papacy in June 1963, he made one thing clear: the Church would not remain silent in the face of this lie. Even the government of West Germany, caught in the fallout of the play's Berlin premiere, quietly apologized to the Vatican, acknowledging the damage it had done. Paul VI didn't waste time. He authorized a monumental task, a full publication of Vatican wartime documents, 12 volumes. Every letter, every speech, every action Pius the Twelfth had taken during the war, laid bare for the world to see. It was the most exhaustive archival effort in modern church history, a weapon against the falsehoods. But it would take years before the world was ready to listen. In Basel, Switzerland, September 1963, 6,000 Catholics gathered outside the theater staging the deputy, protesting with signs and chants. "Catholicism equals tolerance, not hate," they shouted. Some entered the theater, others interrupted the play. A few, Holocaust survivors themselves, stood up and cried out before being escorted out by police. The tension was real, the fire spreading, and in the middle of it all stood Father Riquet, traveling, speaking, holding nothing back. He reminded the world of something they had forgotten. Truth exists, and no amount of artistic license gives anyone the right to trample it. To Riquet, this was no longer just about one pope. It was about memory, about the unnamed heroes of the war, the priests, the nuns, the Jews and non-Jews, the quiet protectors of life, whose legacy was being rewritten. "If we let Pius the Twelfth be falsely condemned," Riquet warned, "we betray the memory of every righteous soul who stood beside him." And he meant it. This wasn't politics. This was about the honor of the dead, about the Jews murdered in silence, and the Pope who never stopped praying for them. About the conscience of a generation that had suffered, and the lie that now threatened to erase their witness. To Riquet, smearing Pius the Twelfth wasn't just an attack on the church. It was an attack on the truth itself, and he would not stand by and watch it happen. While the West drowns in debate, far to the east, the architects of Operation Seat 12 watch in silence and smile. The plan had worked. The seed was planted. A wedge had been driven between Catholics and Jews, between the Vatican and the world. Across the Eastern Bloc, communist newspapers gleefully reprint headlines from Western media, articles accusing the Pope, plays portraying him as a coward. In Moscow, pamphlets roll off printing presses, quoting Hochhut like scripture. "Look," they say, "even the West admits it. The Vatican is morally rotten." Behind the Iron Curtain, life grows harder for Catholics. Bishops are mocked, priests interrogated, party officials sneer. "Oh, you're Pope. You mean the one who collaborated with Hitler?" It's all a lie, but the Soviets know lies only need time. Let them echo long enough, and even the faithful begin to doubt. Doubt, that slow, poisonous weed, finds fertile ground where regimes already poison the soil. But in their quiet celebration, the masterminds of Seat 12 make one fatal miscalculation. They underestimated something. Not strategy, not logistics, but something far more dangerous: conscience. They believed Pius the Twelfth had no defenders, that the dead do not speak. But Pius the Twelfth had witnesses, survivors, believers, men and women who knew the truth and refused to let it die. Operation C12 had overlooked faith. It had overlooked courage. It had overlooked men like Michel Riquet, a kind of counter-spy in the war for truth. A Vatican agent, not of espionage, but of testimony. To the Soviets, these people were more dangerous than spies, because they didn't just expose secrets, they exposed lies. The years pass, but the battle never really ends. Even as the deputy fades from the stage, its shadow remains. The 1960s and 70s bring new books, new accusations, some political, some personal. Some authors continue to crucify the Pope's legacy. Others begin to dig and discover something different. Truth, slow and stubborn, begins to surface. Each new survivor's testimony, each rescued Jew's memory, each Israeli official who quietly thanks the Vatican, all of them chip away at the myth. In the late 1960s, Israel's own ambassador to the Vatican puts it plainly: "We Jews have not forgotten what Pius the Twelfth did for us. It isn't theater, it doesn't make headlines, but it matters. The world is listening, the voices are growing louder. Still, the full unraveling of Operation Seat 12 will take time. And in the end, it won't come from historians, or theologians, or playwrights. It will come from somewhere no one expected, from within the operation itself, a single act of conscience, a confession from one of the men who helped create the lie." Summer 1978. The Cold War is raging. Armies face off across continents. Nations spy on nations. The world holds its breath beneath the weight of unspoken threats. But behind the curtain of global tension, something extraordinary happens. A man vanishes. Not just any man. General Ion Mihai Pachipa, the highest-ranking intelligence officer ever to defect from the Eastern Bloc. Overnight, he slips from Bucharest into the arms of the CIA and disappears into the West. To the Soviets, it's a catastrophe. To the Americans, it's a gold mine. Pachipa carries secrets, real ones. He knows the names, the methods, the murders. He knows how the Kremlin kills, how it lies, how it rewrites reality and calls it truth. He reveals assassination plots, KGB front companies, the inner machinery of communist propaganda, and buried among it all, one secret waits in silence. In those early years, Pachipa says nothing about it. He speaks carefully, calculates every risk. But something is stirring, a memory, a burden. He had played a part in something much darker than espionage. He had helped stain the reputation of a dead man, a man who could not defend himself, a pope. And over time, that truth begins to weigh on him, not as a political matter, not as a strategy, but as a matter of conscience. The struggle inside him will last decades, a silent war between secrecy and truth, until finally, almost 20 years later, he breaks. And when he does, the lie that began in the Kremlin starts to unravel. A quiet article appears in the pages of National Review. It doesn't make front-page news, not yet, but for those who read it, it hits like a thunderclap. The author? Ion Mihai Pachipa, the highest-ranking intelligence defector from the Eastern Bloc, now living in secret somewhere in the United States under an assumed name and government protection. The title: Moscow's Assault on the Vatican. For the first time, the full story of Operation Seat 12 is told, not by a journalist, not by a historian, but by a man who helped build it. In chilling detail, Pachipa recounts how, in February 1960, Nikita Khrushchev approved a secret plan, a super-sensitive disinformation campaign designed to destroy the moral authority of the Vatican. The chosen target? Pope Pius the 12th. Not because of what he said, but because he was dead, and the dead can't defend themselves. Pachipa explains how he, personally, helped initiate the scheme, how he lured the Vatican into opening its archives under the false promise of reconciliation, how the documents were handed to the KGB, and how Soviet agents then twisted, edited, and forged those documents to build a damning narrative. A narrative that would become a play, The Deputy. Pachipa confirms what many had only guessed for decades. that the drama premiered in 1963 with unusually strong backing because it wasn't grassroots, it was orchestrated. He writes that the KGB carefully crafted the deputy using manipulated Vatican documents and selected Erwin Piscator, a devout communist and theater veteran, to direct it. Even the motto of the operation, he reveals, was as cynical as it was precise. The dead cannot defend themselves. Suddenly, the pieces fit. Why did an unknown playwright receive international acclaim overnight? Why were 40 pages of documents attached to the manuscript as supposed evidence? Pachipa has the answer, because the KGB had prepared them. Not everyone accepts his confession. Controversy follows instantly. Western scholars and journalists are skeptical. Why now, after so many years? Where's the paper trail? There are no tapes, no declassified files, only Pachipa's word. At Israel's Yad Vashem Holocaust Institute, historian Dan Mickman voices his doubts. He believes the deputy was born from moral inquiry, not Soviet design. At most, he says, the KGB took advantage of a message that had already been written. Until I see actual KGB documents, I remain unconvinced, say others. Even within the Catholic Church, some are cautious. They believe Pius the Twelfth's innocence has already been established and don't want that truth defended with unproven claims. But Pachipa's voice isn't the only one. Others begin to step forward. Historians uncover additional evidence, Soviet-era archives, coded messages from the Venona Project, notes from the Metrokin files. British historian Michael Burley, German researcher Hubert Necker. They all begin to notice the pattern. The deputy fits the blueprint of a Cold War psychological operation. In 2013, Pachipa teams up with American legal scholar Ronald Reichlak to publish a book, Disinformation. It includes names, details, timelines, and it begins to shift the tide. Reichlak himself admits he didn't believe it at first, but after 2 years of independent research, he came to a sobering conclusion. It was real. Truth, slow and battered, begins to rise. What had once looked like a righteous moral indictment of a silent pope now revealed itself as something far more sinister, a political assassination of character, of legacy, of history. The reputation of Pius the Twelfth begins to recover. The Vatican, already quietly gathering testimony since the 1990s, moves forward with his beatification. In 2009, he is formally declared venerable, a man of heroic virtue. Survivors, Christians, and Jews alike testify to what he did, to the lives he saved, to the risks he took. Even some secular historians, once skeptical, now admit the obvious. Hochhuth's depiction was not history, it was theater. And more than that, it was fiction, wrapped in KGB fingerprints. The myth of Hitler's Pope is crumbling. And as for Operation Seat 12, it collapsed the moment truth found a voice. The disinformation campaign that aimed to destroy Pius the Twelfth's legacy instead triggered the most comprehensive investigation into his wartime actions the Church had ever undertaken. And what it revealed was not silence, but courage. The Soviet Union is gone, its architects long dead, their lies buried with them. All that remains is history, and a slow, unrelenting verdict that continues to be written by memory, by evidence, and by those who still believe in truth. In the end, this wasn't just a battle over one man's reputation. It was a war for memory, for truth, for the soul of the Church. They thought the dead couldn't speak, that silence would win, that a lie told loud enough would become history. But they were wrong, because truth has a voice, and it lives in those who refuse to forget, in those who stand when it's easier to sit, speak when silence feels safer. The question now isn't what they did back then, it's what we do now. When the truth is under attack, will we stay quiet or will we answer?